We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello, welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Everything is happening in the election world with just a few days to go. We're going to dig deep not only into all that, but also into what's happening in the wider world. It's going to be quite the show. Let's get started. As we approach the final week of the 2024 election, everything is looking a little bit tender for politicos and pundits across the media. But what does it mean? Let's get a little bit more granular, and we're joined by nobody best to answer these questions that are coming up than Liberty Nation's executive editor, Leesa K. Thanks for being here, Leesa.
Good to be with you, Mark. I guess we're coming down the stretch now, aren't we? Less than 2 weeks.
We are indeed, and it's actually getting exciting now. It was a bit dull before, with Joe Biden, and then...
Only a Brit would say this is a dull election. I don't know where to even start with that one, but I'll give it to you.
All right. No, I'm obviously being sarcastic. This is an exciting election, and I think there are so many factors that people just aren't recognizing that add all this extra spice to what's going on. And one particular seasoning that I'd like to investigate with you is based on an article that you wrote for the pages of libertynation.com, which covers the early voting. So everybody's talking about early voting and how this is a traditionally favorable Democrat environment. What's your take?
Well, let's review a couple of facts that always seem to surprise people, but the Democrats and the Republicans are not the majority parties in the United States. The majority party are independents. They've got 40% of the electorate. Then, give or take a few percentage points, the Democrats and the Republicans each have approximately 30%. So what you're really looking at is not a majority party in the major parties, but a majority party in the independent party, which is kind of interesting. So what the RNC did under Ronna McDaniel in the last couple of years is she ran a $60 million get out the vote and register Republicans. And she did that. And there are more Republicans, but there still aren't as many Republicans as there are Democrats. So then you say to yourself, okay, digging deeper, who's voting early? Because there's early voting in, I believe it's 46 states now. Well, by the time this airs, it'll probably be all 50. I mean, there's early voting everywhere. It's a trend that the Republicans couldn't stop. It's a trend that may have really pushed them over the edge in losing in 2020. Some people might make that point. But they decided to join the party and join the festive atmosphere of voting early. And I have to say, even me and my family voted early this year, which we have never, ever done. And I had a lot of pushback from my kids because my kids were like, no, I want to go on voting day. I'm like, it's not going to be any different. It's going to feel like voting day. We're going to go to the public library. And it was amazing. It was exactly like voting day. The Democrats had their little tent. The Republicans had their little tent. Democrats had their ballot. The Republicans had their little ballot. You went in, they gave you the I voted sticker. They checked your ID, the whole bit. So
voter ID, surely, Leesa, surely that's just racist, right?
Well, it actually was a real ID. The real ID is your voter ID and your right to fly domestically without a passport, all rolled in one. So convenient. But anyway, we did vote early, and everyone said that actually went pretty well. So I think a lot of other people, the reason I mention that is because I think a lot of other people are doing that to the tune of about, as of today, as we record this, 17 million people have early voted.
So 17 million is quite a haul of votes. Is there any way to determine which way they're leaning?
Well, it's interesting because early voters can be divided into three categories. And there's this great website called Target Smart. I think that's the name of it. Anyway, it's really interesting. And they divide themselves into party affiliation, gender, and battleground states. So you can dig up how many people voted in Arizona, more Democrats, more Republicans. You can dig up how many women voted. And then you can dig up how many women voted in New Hampshire or, wherever. And so obviously the Democrats have the party affiliation. Democrats have voted more than the Republicans. But the question is, how much more versus last time? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a big distinction, I guess. And
the gap is closing. The gap is closing, let me say.
Yeah, very much so. Very much. It seems that I think the point you made about how it was a tactic, early voting was a tactic that was shunned in 2020 to the detriment of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
This year, they're really just going hell for leather with essentially embracing everything that they were against in 2020 because it's politically expedient, which is, what all parties do. Once they realize there's a formula, they follow the formula. Let's talk about the battleground states a little bit, because we do hear all the talk about the national polls and the flitting between different candidates. But in reality, national polls don't mean anything. I mean, even if, say, for example, Kamala Harris is up, I think as we're recording, she's about 0.9 to 1% up nationally across an aggregate of polls. Even if she's up there, that really doesn't make much of a difference to the final,
right,
because it's an electoral college race. So it's all about the battlegrounds. And Donald Trump seems to be, at present, running away with the battleground polling.
Well, there are some strange things going on. In Minnesota, it's very odd. The people that voted last time don't seem to be coming out in droves in Minnesota. And that's never really been considered a battleground state, I don't think, at all, because it's always gone Democratic for the last, is it 30 years or 50 years? Or long time.
I think Richard Nixon was the last person to get
72, that's right.
Even Ronald Reagan didn't get it because obviously
right.
Mondale from
right.
I've got some interesting data on Minnesota, by the way.
Do yeah, tell me.
So as I'm sure you know, Leesa, the Real Clear Politics prediction map of electoral college votes, they now list Minnesota as a toss-up, which is quite interesting.
Odd. Yeah, that's really weird.
So that joins in with the other 7 states. And then, of course, I think there's Nebraska's second congressional district, which is also a toss-up.
Right.
But I was reading a very fascinating article on a place that I'd never really heard of, but it's called the Middle East Eye. And they suggest, based on their polling, Muslim American voters in places like Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin are almost evenly split between Kamala Harris and Jill Stein of Green Party fame, which is quite weird. Now, if you think about how that might translate to Minnesota, which also has a large Muslim American community, I don't think that they're turning out for Kamala Harris. I think that her position on
the Palestinian question
and the Palestinian question, I don't think she's been vociferous enough to earn their vote, and that could be a huge factor, because realistically, if she is ahead in Minnesota, it's 3.5 points, and the Muslim American vote could easily sway that.
Well, where that really takes place, I think, is in Michigan and in Dearborn, Michigan, where there's a major, community of Muslim people and Muslim faith. So it's interesting because if you look at Michigan and you look at Pennsylvania, the Democrats are coming out earlier, and there are more early voters for Democrats in Michigan and Pennsylvania. So you think, oh, well, they're losing. The Republicans are losing, but that's not necessarily true, because they've closed the gap. And if what happens on election day, where more Republicans come out than Democrats, then there's a little bit more of a balance. But where Republicans are doing well is in Arizona. Their early voters are neck and neck. I wrote in 2020, 4.2% more Republicans have voted than in 2020. So that's very interesting. Also in Virginia, the congressional districts' early turnout in rural areas, which tend to be Republican, have the highest early turnout. So the congressional districts in rural areas in Virginia have the highest turnout. Virginia is one of those purple states, goes blue a lot since Barack Obama, but then we voted in a Glenn Youngkin, who is a conservative Republicans. So if Virginia goes conservative, if Virginia goes Republican, I think the election is over.
Yeah, those are the two ones to watch on election day, Minnesota and Virginia. I think those are going to be the most fascinating races with which to write 1,000 articles about after, of course. But I think you may be right there. And we're going to be back with Leesa K. Donna after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.